All right, get this show on the road. Good morning, everyone. We're going to call our meeting to order. This is the Swanee River Water Management District Governing Board meeting and public hearing. You can get with us on YouTube at https://www.youtube.com/SRWMD. And it is May 14th at 9 a.m. If everyone would rise, we'll have our invocation and pledge.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for the rain. We thank you for each and every family represented here today, the interest they have in the environment. Father, I pray for staff and this board as we undertake the issues before us today, that you will lead us and guide us in the decisions that we make. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Very nice to see so many people join us today. If we could go ahead and do a roll call, Ms. Robin.
Chair Johns,
Here.
Mr. Keith,
Here.
Mr. Schwab,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Mr. Sessions,
Here.
Mr. Thompson,
Here.
Mr. Lloyd.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we get started with our business, we need to have a motion. We have an appointment of Larry Sessions to our audit committee.
I make that motion, Madam Chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you. Are there any changes to our agenda?
Yes, ma'am, we have one update, Business and Community Services, agenda item number 14, fiscal year 2022 to 2023 physical audit has been updated.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. All right, we are going to open our meeting to public comment at this time. And I have got a few cards here. And if I call your name, just come up to the podium if you'd like to speak. First off, I'm going to ask for Joanna Riley Brown, if she is in the office or in the room. No. Do you want to take care of that one, Troy? Okay.
Chair, would you prefer us to hold on to this one for the Springs funding
Projects.
project?
We can.
Okay.
We can just wait and I'll recall you back up.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Let me do it this way. Is there anyone that would like to speak not about the Springs? Okay, well, I will just wait then, and we'll call everyone when that item comes up. I see a bunch of folks here that I'm pleased to see them in our audience, and we'll take care of that when it comes up. All right, then any other comment that anyone would like to make? Not, we'll close public comment at this time and move on to our agenda. We have a consent agenda. If everyone has had a chance to read over everything, and is there a motion on our consent agenda?
Make that motion, Madam Chair.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. The next item on our agenda is our hydrologic conditions report.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good morning.
I'd like to present the hydrologic conditions report for April 2024. Excuse me. My thanks first goes out to Paul Buchanan. He sent me this great photo of very flooded Swanee River at Branford over at the Ivy Memorial Park where the boat ramp is. You can definitely see how much the river is up just from the photo. He took this around the 23rd of April. At this point, the Branford was just about to crest at a height of 27.1 feet, which put it in minor flood stage at this point. Minor flood stage begins at 25 feet, so it was a few feet just above that. I think it's a good photo, and it definitely kind of tells the story of the things we've had to deal with this past week with this past month with the rainfall that we had and the heightened river conditions as well. So my thanks goes out to Paul. A great photo and a great way to start our hydro report for April 2024. Rainfall for April 2024, we had a district-wide average of 4.2 inches. That's about 23% higher than that long-term average of 3.4 inches. We increased our surplus slightly at the end of March. We had a surplus of 5.3 inches. That increased to 6.5 inches at the end of April, moving that window forward and picking up this higher than average amount of 4.2 inches. For the 4 to 5 inch range, looking at the map, encompasses that district-wide average for the month. Less than that amount, 3 to 4 inches in dark blue and less than 3 inches in light blue. We see a lot of the lower amounts in the southern and eastern parts of our district versus the northern and kind of western parts. This is kind of where all the rain fell, just with all the frontal boundaries we had come through for the month. 5 to 6 inches is in orange, 6 to 7 in red, and more than 7 inches. We had some areas of more than 7 inches this past month. Jefferson County, Madison County, and even over into a little bit of Hamilton County all saw more than 7 inches of rainfall, and that's in that pink color right there. Our largest rainmaker for the month was the 10th and 11th. That was that big system that kind of came through Tallahassee, dumped a bunch of rain. We got quite a bit too over in our western part. Once again, we see this up in the northern and definitely over in the western part, we see the higher amounts of rainfall. District-wide average for this time period was 2.28 inches or 2.3 inches, which represented 55% of the total for the month. So 55% of that came from these 2 days here. Once again, as you go south and over into the east, we don't see quite as much rainfall. We're seeing 1 to 2 inches in dark blue, less than 1 inch really from this 2 day window up in that light blue color. 3 to 4 inches, of course, in orange, 4 to 5 in red, 5 to 6 in pink, and I added one more category, white, which is more than 6 inches of rainfall fell in this 2 day period up in Jefferson and into Madison counties. I think just a slight bit of Hamilton County may have seen some as well. I did also want to point out too, just around our border with Northwest Florida Water Management District, just up in here, there were a couple little spots in Jefferson County that saw more than 9 inches of rainfall in that 2 day period. So it was definitely a rainmaker for us, for sure. So this is the 30-day departure from precipitation from the National Weather Service. I kind of want to caveat this because we've gotten some rain since this data was pulled yesterday. I do expect this to change, but as of yesterday, when this map was made, we were seeing some deficits within our district. Mainly the really not a lot, half an inch to 1 inch of deficit in that light yellow. Darker yellow is 1 to 2 inches of deficit, but as you kind of travel down into the lower portions of our district, kind of along the coastal counties, we're seeing anywhere from 2 to 3 inches of deficit, and that's in that little more tan color. We did have some areas of surpluses in our district, half an inch to 1 inch in green, that light green, the dark green, 1 to 2 inches of surplus, and I think we had just a little bit of blue. It's hard to see over in Madison County, and that's 2 to 3 inches of surplus. I did want to point out too where all those boundaries were coming through, the frontal boundaries, dumping a bunch of rain in South Georgia. They were seeing quite a bit of that, and they're seeing some surpluses in that area as well. But as I mentioned, we've gotten some rain yesterday. We're expecting some more today, so I expect this to at least improve slightly, but I would expect a higher improvement. Stream flow conditions for April 2024. South Georgia actually began the month, most of their rivers began the month in the above normal, the 75th to 90th, with the exception of Alapaha. That one began in the greater than 90th percentile. But as you start to move into our district, things kind of shift around. Most of our river gauges began in the normal range and ended the month in the above normal. So it's almost the complete opposite of what happened up in Georgia, which makes sense because all that water is coming down in our area. So we still had some really high levels, flows in our rivers toward the end of the month. Few exceptions though, Steinhatchee, over into Worthington, Fort White, New River, and Graham, all of those gauges began and ended the month in that 25th to 75th percentile. So our river gauges, despite the fact they're high, we definitely don't have to worry about any below normal or much below normal at this point, just due to the increase in rainfall that we've gotten here recently. Upper Florida and aquifer levels, this is the end of March 2024. I just wanted to show this to compare with what we have this month. Let's go back. What we were seeing in March, we were seeing an increase in the above 90th percentile, especially stretched over into Jefferson County, Madison County. Hamilton had a few wells up there as well. Columbia, Baker, Bradford, and down into Gilchrist and Lafayette. That's that dark blue color, above 90th percentile in all those areas. Many of our other wells around the district were encased in this lighter blue color, the 75th to 90th percentile. We did have some areas in our central district and even up into Taylor County seeing 25th to 75th, which is the normal range. So if we fast forward 1 month, it's a little bit different. We're seeing a nice expansion of that greater than 90th percentile up into Madison, over into Hamilton, Baker, Columbia, Union, Bradford. I did also want to point out the wells are trending upward as well, and that's due to the increase in rainfall that we've gotten, and along with the aquifer recharge that we've gotten from some of the high levels of the river. If you follow the Suwannee on down, especially in Suwannee County, and then even down into Dixie and Gilchrist County, we're seeing some of those greater than 90th percentiles as well. Still an extended area of the 75th to 90th, which are pretty high as well around our district. And we've got this a little bit high, I guess, more wells showing down in the normal, the 25th to 75th. That's stretching from Taylor County through Dixie, down into Levy, up to Alachua, and Columbia and Suwannee counties as well. So all in all, looking pretty good for our aquifer levels. A little bit high in the north, but better than low, I guess. Yeah. U.S. Drought Monitor, this is released this past Thursday. I wanted to point out that we don't have any issues right now with drought in our district, and I don't expect this to change this Thursday with the update either. Panhandle's looking good too, but as you go into peninsular Florida, they were seeing some abnormally dry conditions in yellow, and then that tan color is moderate drought. Seeing that as of the past update, but I'm sure with some of these bands coming through, this may improve ever so slightly. I did want to mention also that we are just about done with the El Nino that we have. I guess we've had it for a few months now. It's expected to end probably within the month. And then from that point, we're going to travel over into the El Nino Southern Oscillation neutral conditions. We do have a La Nina on the horizon. So we've got a little bit of a La Nina alert. So it's going to be about a 49% chance of going into that La Nina from June to August, and a 69% chance from July to September. So it's coming. It's just a matter of when down the road we actually see that La Nina come into our area. With that said, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration seasonal outlook for May through July, we do see above normal rainfall probabilities, and as far as I've seen this month, I could believe it, for May through July. And we also have above normal temperature probabilities on the horizon too. Most of the United States is going to see above normal temperature probabilities for May through July 2024. All right, our April 2024 summary, we had a rainfall amount of 4.2 inches, about 23% higher than that long-term average of 3.4 inches. We did have a surplus of 5.3 inches at the end of March. As I mentioned, we increased that as we moved that window of time over and increased it to 6.5 inches of rainfall surplus. District-wide upper Florida and aquifer levels actually rose a little bit from the 81st percentile in March to the 83rd percentile at the end of April. We did have a median level increase across our monitored wells of about half a foot around the district. A transition to El Nino Southern Oscillation neutral conditions are likely next month. 49% chance of La Nina development from June to August, and a higher percent at 69 from July through September. And finally, no portions of the district currently experiencing any drought conditions, and I don't expect that to change with this update this Thursday for the U.S. Drought Monitor. Madam Chair, I'll take any questions that the board may have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on rainfall?
Just an observation, Robbie. It looks like we're continuing, especially with this rain we're getting today. We're getting a lot of rain in South Georgia. You expect that to more or less keep those water levels up in the north end and possibly keep the river levels up for a while?
Madam Chair? I actually did an update to our website yesterday when they kind of came out with the predictions, and it does look like some of the South Georgia gauges are going to be back up into, not quite flood, but it's going to be up into action stage. I think some of the ones around Valdosta and Withlacoochee, on down into Panetta, I think that one's going to be also. As of right now, I'm not seeing some of them are increasing on the south end of the Suwannee, just down there around Manatee. They're going up just a little bit into the action stage. I'm not seeing anything currently on the Santa Fe, but things could change. I mean, if we get hammered with a lot of rain here today, I could see getting possibly up into minor flood on some of those, just from the backwater effects of the Swanee. Madam Chair, I did want to mention also, I wanted to put the National Hurricane Center's predictions for 2024 hurricane, I guess they're predictions. They haven't come out yet. Those will be out May 23rd, so I will present those at the next board meeting. That's the number of hurricanes that they'll, the range, I guess, that they come out with. Seems a little late this year for some reason.
Yep.
So on the 23rd, those predictions will come out. So are you assuming that the equal chances or the neutral conditions will show up on that day too? Because I've been looking for that for about 2 months.
Madam Chair. Well, I don't know. I can just tell you that that is expected to happen, but every time I see it, it's like, oh, we're going to do that this month. We're going to do that. So they keep pushing on down the road with
Oh, so they do that.
the folks
I
that
mean,
have
because
the
I'm
models.
assuming that you're doing that, but that's okay.
No, sir. No, sir. The folks that have the models are doing that.
You're doing fine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We are getting quite a bit of rain. Generally, our rain hits us in June. Is our rainy season just here early this year? Is that kind of what it's looking like?
Madam Chair, I have a bonus slide I could show you.
Ah,
All right.
always got that. He's got that sleeve.
So this is our monthly historical rainfall averages from 1932 to 2023. So we are currently at, well, I'm presenting for April's 3.39. We do have a little bit of a bump up in May, but really our rainy season tends to begin in June, July, August, even into September. And we kind of have a little bit of a lull, and then we pick back up. Really, March seems to be the time when most of the flooding kind of occurs because you get a lot more rainfall. But this year, for some reason, it seemed like it was just a little late. I guess that does happen. But this is kind of how we look here. Just to answer your question, we could see a little bit more than this next month. I mean, especially if that El Nino tends to hang on just a little bit longer, it's possible we could see, much higher than 3.5 inches in May. I honestly, I wouldn't doubt it because I was looking at some of the gauges and we've gotten already around, I think the gauge at Live Oak actually had within the last 7 days 3.8 inches of rain. So that's already above that 3.5 inches. So we'll see how it pans out. Long story short, yes, we could see an early rainy season. If this La Nina takes hold, we could see a dry season. It really, I hate to say it depends, but that's just kind of how it is, unfortunately.
It's a typical weatherman.
Yes. All right. Any other questions?
He faces the glass when he gives us the report.
You can look outside, right?
I mean, Tom couldn't do any better. So, I mean, what did you expect?
That means a lot, actually.
Oh, dear. All righty. Thank you. That
very
was
much, Madam
very
Chair.
helpful. Cooperating agencies and organizations. I know we've got lots in our audience of folks here for,
A lot of the cooperators that we have relative to the Springs projects and alternative water supply projects.
okay. All right. Do we want to go ahead then with our service recognition? All right.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and those in attendance. Madam Chair, thank you for giving us the opportunity to recognize one of our long-term employees here at the district, Mr. John Wood. John is retiring from the district as our Chief Information Officer, having served 32 years over 2 terms of employment with Swanee River Water Management District. He's worked under every executive director except for one, which I think was Jack Woodard, during his years of service. He's been employed in the information technology field for a total of 42 years. John started his career at the district in 1982 after graduating from the University of Central Florida with a degree in computer science. He designed and implemented many of the district's early database systems. Leaving the district for work in the private sector in 1984, he began working as a software engineer building flight and armor training simulators for the military at GE Aerospace, now Lockheed Martin, in Central Florida. In 1994, he returned to the district with a position in information technology, converting existing databases and systems to Oracle. John's seen many changes in technology throughout his career at the district. In 1982, the district had one of the first mini computers in the area and supported 16 user terminals. Today, we're proud that the district has physical, virtual, cloud-based infrastructure that supports the entire staff both on premises and remotely. John and his wife Kathy live in Live Oak and have two married daughters, Caroline and Steve Martin of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Tori and Tommy Ekstrand of Austin, Texas. Kathy is a retired physical education teacher, and I'd also like to thank her for her service to the education field. John and Kathy became grandparents this past January to Caroline and Stephen's son, Mason. And if you didn't notice, he was extremely proud of that. John has been active in community service activities. He's the past president of Live Oak Kiwanis Club. He was named Kiwanian of the Year in 2010. He also served as chairman of the Business Advisory Committee of the Swanee-Hamilton Area Vocational Technical School. He was a youth soccer coach at the recreation, school, and club levels for many years. And John's hobbies include playing pickleball, biking, and playing with his dogs, Denver and Bear. I just want to say I appreciate John's professionalism, his work ethic, his honesty, and his love for the Florida State Seminoles. John, I just want to say it's been a pleasure to work with you, sir, and you'll be greatly missed.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, members of the board, if I could just say a few words. So, yeah, 32 years, 64 years old, that's half of my life has been spent in service of this district. Served under a lot of executive directors, a lot of bosses. I have to say Tim and Hugh have been the best. But no, I've also served under a lot of boards, and our management and our boards have always been very supportive of our information technology efforts, and I applaud you for that, and I encourage you to continue to support those efforts. We've been able to keep our staff small but productive. That was one of our goals that they set many years ago, using technology to kind of increase the productivity of our staff. When I started here 42 years ago, we had 4 people in IT and GIS. Today we have 5. So we have not really expanded too much on that, but still been able to be productive. So anyway, that's all I have to say, but
Well, thank you very much for your service, and we're going to miss you.
Congratulations, John.
Miss this.
Yes, sir.
Huh?
I got to know John whenever I was still with the Department of Ag, and our office was located here, and been able to work with him over the years. And he has always served the district very well. I could see it in that capacity, and I have seen it and appreciated it even more in my current capacity here with the district. And he will be missed. He has done a great job mentoring Tyler and Bo, excuse me, along those lines. And so I think that it'll be a somewhat of a seamless transition from that perspective. But, you know, you're going to miss the personality as well. And John has always been a team player here and very supportive of any of our efforts. And I know many of you have engaged relative to your IT needs, relative to the board's positions. And while some of that may have been with Tyler, I'm sure that there have been occasions when he has referred to John for what the fix would be in that. But anyway, if you all are receptive to it, would like to get a picture with John and would like to present John a sturgeon. I think you wanted one, and so would like to present John a sturgeon as part of that.
See, as long as he's not jumping in the boat, right?
There you go.
Got it.
You're welcome. They have a unique history behind it. And if you're around today, I think John is gonna present a little more information about it. Front and center, John.
Try to scooch in like you like. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Thank y'all.
We're gonna paint it garnet and gold, but I couldn't do it.
Physical wall patterns, they work better in the ones that work.
We have to get a pickleball lesson. Everybody plays.
That's a big thing. I had no idea taking off like that.
It's huge. All right, I have a question for the board, and I guess too for Robin. Since we have so many folks here for the funding and the grants, would y'all like to change our agenda and move that up?
Yes.
to
Yes, I
now?
think that
Good to me.
Okay, so do we need a motion to amend that? Nope, okay.
Make the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? That sounds good.
Moving on.
All right. So we're going to then just skip right on through and we're going to come on down here to our human resources section.
You have to find him.
Oh,
We're going to agenda item 19, correct?
Yes.
yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And we'll have our presentation first and then we'll have our public comment. That's all right with everyone. All right, good deal. Poor Leroy throwing it on him. Good morning, Leroy. Sorry I upped this on you a little bit, but we've got so many good folks here today. We thought we'd just go ahead and have you right now.
Or do it all? Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good morning. Good morning.
Wonderful to be up here this morning. We had a couple of things on the agenda. First, I wanted to introduce a new hire to resource management. Actually, our new hire, Marcus Beck, is in the Office of the ERP section. Marcus Beck graduated from UF with a BS in biological engineering and is filling our entry-level engineering specialist position, reviewing environmental resource permits. He's back there. Originally from Orlando, he enjoys making art and his cat Wolfie. He has already proven to be a tremendous help in the permitting team, and we are glad to have him on board. So if we would just welcome Marcus back to the staff.
Welcome, Marcus.
Welcome, Marcus. Welcome, Walker.
We'll work you real hard.
Just think about this right here. 42 more years and you get a sturgeon too. About the long haul around here, okay?
Also, 17 and 18 were for informational purposes. And so what we will do is start with item 19, BCS 29, which is alternative water supply funding projects for fiscal year 24-25. District conducted a transparent and public process to select fiscal year 24-25 AWS project proposals based on FDEP's 2020 guidance. The selection process included email, website outreach, one-on-one feedback, and then all of that was prior to the submission of the applications, which were in December of 2023. District received 7 applications that have been posted on our website for submission to DEP. Staff specifically recommends 5 of those projects for a total cost of $130 million. These 5 include 3 district projects, 1 local project, and 1 water and wastewater cooperative. The spreadsheet here is a list of all of those projects as you are looking at it. The ones that are in gray are the 5 that are recommended, and then the ones that below the gray are not recommended. I do want to stress that all the applications will be submitted to DEP. Just the 5 will have a recommendation for us. There is a map of the locations of all of the applications here, so you can see kind of where they are. We can go back up to the recommendation. So the recommendation is to authorize the executive director to submit all the alternative water supply funding projects and applications to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I believe there are people here who would like to comment on the recommendation.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Leroy, just to clarify, and you stated this, but all of the funding projects on this list will be submitted, and there may be alternative funding for those, even though they're not recommended. Is that correct, or am I incorrect on that statement?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
That is correct. We have recommended 5 out of the 7, but any of them can be funded through DEP.
And when did they go to Tallahassee?
They will go before.
Okay. We want to go ahead and have public comment now, or go through the Springs funding also and then have public comment?
Madam Chair, we need to do
Yeah.
them separate.
Separate, okay. All right, that'll be fine. Any other questions from the board? All right, at this time then we'll open public comment for this item number 19, which is alternative water supply funding projects for fiscal year 2024, 2025. And let's see here, that one's Springs. Let me separate these just a little bit. Robert Parton, did you want to speak on the alternative water supply or?
Good morning, everyone. Madam Chair.
Good morning.
First of all, on behalf of the Waukesha Water and Wastewater Cooperative, I'm honored to express our profound gratitude for your invaluable support of this project. Your recommendation to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for the funding for the fiscal year 24-25. W3C, which we use as shorten all that, we're down some, so that's where we refer to it as. The potable water and wastewater treatment recharge project represents a significant stride to ensuring sustainable water resources for Levy County. This initiative is encompassing a new water treatment plant and wastewater treatment facility and extensive pipeline infrastructure across from Cedar Key to Orta Creek and into Bronson. It is pivotal for our community and long-term health and prosperity. And your recommendation of the importance of this project reinforces your commitment and energizes our efforts to enhance this regional water supply and wastewater management system. We are committed to executing this project with the highest standards of efficiency and environmental stewardship. Again, we'd like to thank you for your trust and support. We look forward to our continued collaboration in bringing this visual project to fruition. And ensuring a better and more sustainable future for the residents of Levy County. I would be at a loss to not say that I would not be able to be up here without the support of your staff that has helped us immensely with this project. I have to name them because we become first name basis, okay? That's this fellow standing right here to my left, of course. Kim, Miss Krista, and Lauren, they have just helped us out immensely, and the rest of the staff. So, like I say, I love to fly, but you don't want me you don't want me piloting the plane. So it's like I say, it's without their immense knowledge and everything, this project would be just sitting still. And again, I commend you with them, and thank you so much for the support and consent of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Burdette? Oh,
I apologize for breaking protocol. I did not turn this in.
oh, that's a check off on your name. Would you like to speak now? Or Sue? Okay, with Mr. Same, okay. All right. Well, I will call John Rittenhouse then.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Board. I'm John Rittenhouse. I'm the new general manager at Cedar Key Water and Sewer District. And I think everybody's pretty aware of the water and wastewater situations in Cedar Key. And this project with the WC3, the Wakasasa Water Wastewater Consortium, is the most important thing this city will ever tackle. And it's been started, it's starting to gain legs, but it would be nothing without the Swanee River Water Management District. And Leroy and staff, and we get fed up sometimes with the way money's dispensed and all that, but this is going to help a lot of people it's the right thing to do. And I assure you, we will be judicious with the money. We will spend it properly, and you're going to help out a lot of good people that are struggling right now. So thank you to the board, and appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Sue, would you like to come up?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to the Swanee River Water Management District and the governing board for supporting the town of Bronson's septic tank phase out phase 3 project. This project will have a significant impact on our community by removing approximately 270 septic systems from our service. Right now, we have currently 220 residents on our wastewater system, and we've struggled over the last couple of years. We actually took a 25% rate increase May 1st of last year, and we just took another 25% rate increase May 1st of this year. So residents are definitely struggling, and we've been trying to get the rest of our residents onto sewer for quite some time. Not only will this improve both the economic and the environmental conditions in our town, but it will also provide substantial environmental benefits to the Silver River and Upper Silver River Rainbow Spring Group BMAP. This project underscores our commitment to environmental stewardship and will contribute to the preservation of the spring shed and Florida's precious natural resources. We sincerely appreciate your support and recognition of the importance of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming today. All right, Mike New. Where did I know I saw Mike somewhere? Here you are. You're hiding behind Leroy.
Yes, ma'am. And I think I am on
The next one,
the next agenda item, not this one. My apologies.
no problem. I'll save your name right here. Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else would like to speak on item 19? Okay, we'll close public comment. Leroy, you're on for 20.
We have, I have done the
Oh,
recommendation.
sorry. Yes.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we approve
And I second that motion.
staff's recommendation for these funding projects.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Good luck with that one. We've got our fingers crossed. That's a good project.
Madam Chair, item 20, BCS 35, the It is in reference to the Springs funding projects for fiscal year 24-25. Again, the district conducted a transparent and public process to select the fiscal year 24-25 Springs proposals based on DEP's 2019 guidance. Again, the district reached out to all the applicants prior to submission in the same way. The submittals, again, were due December 2023. The district received 13 applications, all of which have been posted on the website. Out of the 13 that have been submitted, the district will be recommending 8 of the 13 for a little over $66 million. Again, of the 8 of the 13 projects consist of 4 governmental projects and 4 nonprofit organizations. The list is below with all the information. And if there's any question as to why that is so big, that entire chart has to be submitted to DEP, and the board has to approve the entire chart. That's why you have such big, long charts that seem to go forever. But that's the reason. So if you look at the 13, you have the 8 that are in gray. Again, those are the ones that are being recommended. Below that are the 13. Again, as with the AWS, all 13 will be submitted to DEP. Again, we have a map showing the locations of all of the applications that were submitted. Well, back to the recommendation. So the recommendation is to authorize the executive director to submit Springs funding projects applications to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And again, I believe we have comments.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the board for Leroy on these projects?
Leroy, this, Madam Chair. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Leroy, the amount of, for this year's budget for requests, is it about in line with what we normally request, or does it seem, the amount of funding that we're requesting, is it about what it has been in the past?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I ask, for clarification, are you? talking
Well,
about the
just
number?
is the 60 some odd million, I was trying to determine, the $66 million request for the 13 projects, is that number, I mean, is there a feel at the district that funding is available? I guess what I'm asking.
Madam Chair, we will not know exactly how much DEP, the amount that DEP can authorize is based on the legislative budget that they receive yearly. So we will not know how much they will have. Basically what we can do is look at the merit of the projects and recommend the number of projects that we feel should be recommended. But again, all of the projects are submitted, so, they all have an opportunity.
Mhm.
Thompson, generally the legislature and the governor has approved $50 million a year statewide for Springs projects, of which gets divvied up actually between 4 of the water management districts. And it varies every year how much we actually will see. If you don't ask, you don't get. So it's a big ask. But a large portion of it, if not all of it.
I think that's what I was trying to get to, is it's unlikely that all these projects will get funded, but they are being submitted and they're all meritus based, they have merit and they should be submitted. But if they're not funded under that program, is there other funding available outside of the Springs that might help out 1 or 2 of these projects that don't get funded, or is it just one that's got to roll over to the next year, the next budget year?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So DEP has in the past selected projects for other funding sources. They have more than just these two that receive applications. And if they feel that a project is fundable in another funding source, they will move that around. So although all of these projects may not be funded through Springs, they may be funded through other. And that goes the same for AWS as well.
Clarifies what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, at this time we'll open up to public comment. And let's see here. Mike, would you like to take a turn at the podium?
Yes, ma'am. Fill out the paperwork properly. Rule number one. Thank you and good morning. My name is Mike New. I'm Newberry's city manager. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak before this governing board. Newberry appreciates the governing board and your staff who partner with us to help protect Florida's water resources. I hope to make 3 points during my comments this morning. First, that Newberry is a responsible community that understands our need to protect the environment from pollution and protect our natural resources. Our community, our elected body gets it. Newberry is a responsible community that understands that providing that level of service should really be coming from our residents. We need to pay to ensure that we are protecting the environment that we live in and to establish rates and impact fees to accomplish that. Third point I want to make, though, is that the changes in environmental law and rapid, unprecedented increases in the cost of construction have resulted in project costs that far exceed what we'd planned for and really what we consider to be affordable. The increases in our construction cost estimate for a wastewater treatment plant expansion today are threefold. 3 times what they were 4 years ago when we got into the planning process, and that's the official planning process. We got into the unofficial planning process about 8 years ago. We knew it was coming. We saw where our capacity was going, but we officially stepped into the planning phase and partnering with DEP for funding and those sorts of things. And we expected our construction cost for the level of treatment that we decided to build to be in the $22 a gallon range, about $20 million for a 1 million gallon per day plant. And our construction cost estimate today significantly exceed that. So in the 70s, Newberry constructed its first central wastewater treatment plant. Back then, we paid $1 per gallon of capacity that we were providing. And we all get inflation. I do too. Unfortunately, I can say that I was kind of around in the late 70s, early 80s when we were building wastewater plants for $1 or $2 a gallon. Some 50 years later, in 2020, we began our process for expansion. The first thing we do is with our planning phases, we prepare a wastewater facilities plan and a preliminary engineer report, about a 4-inch thick document that says these are all your options and this is what's cost effective, and here's our recommendation on what you should be doing going into the future. That cost estimate at that point, when we completed those reports, we thought we were going to pay $20 to $22 a gallon for capacity, and our community braced for that. 2021, we received an administrative order from DEP to improve our treatment levels beyond traditional carbon and suspended solid removal. We knew it was coming. It had been a trend in the industry, so we weren't surprised by that. The little thing called a Basin Action Management Plan, which I bet y'all understand way better than I do, but BMAPs. We found that we were in a BMAP and that everybody in a BMAP was going to increase the level of treatment that they provided. So we received this, ran it through our engineers, and simply that step that administrative order that came from us providing that higher level of treatment, it doubled the cost of our treatment plant. We went from $20 a gallon to $40 a gallon because of new environmental standards that had been promulgated by the state and now had shown their way up into our permit. And we were scrambling. We were aware that communities adjacent to us were scrambling as well. The city of Archer, about 10 miles south of us, they'd been wanting to be in the wastewater business ever since I'd gotten into the wastewater business and had just been unsuccessful in finding the right vehicle to get there. We started having conversations with them, and eventually we partnered through them. We've executed an interlocal agreement, and they are going to begin, when they complete their collection system, they're going to begin pumping their wastewater to Newberry. So we managed to accomplish a regional treatment facility. We've extended the invitation both to Trenton and to High Springs. I believe High Springs eventually is going to get there. They're just kind of at a different phase of things. And I think Trenton is just simply selected to go an alternate route that is essentially getting them to the same place that we are. But we believe in economies of scale, and that by building bigger, we can reduce the cost per gallon and thereby have savings to all of the customers in the region. So as a result of that agreement, our newest cost estimates revealed that we were going to reduce our cost to a whopping $37.50. So we were saving a little bit of money, and we were proud of that. If we can partner with some more people, there may be some other opportunities. But today we continued through the design phase, and we've completed our design. We are ready to go to bid. The only thing holding us back today is funding, and really that's funding from the state of Florida. We're using DEP as our bank, and they're not quite ready for the project cost yet, but we are sitting on ready to go. The most recent engineer's opinion of probable costs received 2 weeks ago, $80 million. We have now increased to $66 a gallon, 3.5 times what we thought it was going to be a mere 4 years ago. So to your question, Mr. Thompson, about are we seeing costs consistently, I'd say over 4 years that the same level of treatment improvement and the same number of applicants, but your construction costs, the cost of your ask, are going up significantly. And in Newberry's case, the ability to plan for a $20 or $30 million plant expansion is what we anticipated, and we understand that those rate impacts will make us about the most expensive wastewater plant in the state. When we go to the state of Florida and ask for an $80 million loan, the answer is we don't have the resources to pay that back over a 30-year life, and we understand. We acknowledge that, and we agree with them. We don't have that kind of revenue stream coming from our residents, and I think it would force our rates to be 200%, 300% of the state average if we were to try to take on that. So we're kind of in a tough situation here we know what it's going to take to get there. We have no idea really how a community of the size of Newberry, 8,500 residents, about 2,800 of them connected to our wastewater system, can afford debt service on $60 to $80 million worth of funding. I would tell you that our elected officials understand rates and the need for rates, and when we reset our rates every year, we do a rate analysis every year during budget, we adjust them, and for the last 5 years, we've just about maxed out what we can increase those rates for. Those rates include funding for depreciation. We understand our equipment wears out and we need a funding source to repair it. And we collect very aggressive impact fees. Every time we set a new meter for a new home that's being constructed in Newberry, our commission has authorized a cost, and that home today pays about $4,100 towards the cost of a wastewater plant expansion. And that revenue source, it's going up. It eventually, to meet today's construction costs, it needs to exceed $10,000. So when I got into the wastewater business, Central Wastewater was a less expensive option than putting in a septic tank because we got such economies of scale. And we can put in rural Newberry today, you can hire a contractor and put in a septic tank for under $5,000 all day long. And the construction costs that we're seeing, which is just the market, it's a competitive market, are going to force that same home, if they connect to our system, to pay their fair share of the wastewater treatment plant. It will exceed $10,000. It looks like it's going to settle in around $12,000. We understand we're going to have to get there. I can tell you that elected officials will not make a decision to do that in one fell swoop. So we'll build a 3 or 5 year plan so that our cap charges increase to meet the market for construction, and it will be somewhere in the $10,000 to $12,000 per connection rate. So our rates are sufficient to cover our operating costs, and we do set aside funding for depreciation. We've seen the price increase that I've mentioned is 12% annually for the last 4 years, and we have not kept up funding wise. We have been able to save and scrimp and get a grant here or there, and we are increasing our down payment about $2 million a year, and our costs are going up by $10 and $15 million a year. And hopefully there's an end to it, but today we're not seeing that. Like I said, we got our latest report 2 weeks ago. We thought things would level, and they're not leveling out. And we believe we'll have 8 bidders. We have been beating the state for contractors to make sure they give us pricing on this and on bid day. And with all the construction in Florida, it's just very difficult. So I'm going to conclude, I promise. When we increase our impact fees and when we increase our rates, what the effect is going to have on our community is going to be chilling. Our residents are going to be faced with high rates, and they won't like it. Our ability to have new connections, which is why we're building a treatment plant. Newberry's growing, and we know we need extra capacity. We charge an impact fee to pay the debt service, but when our impact fees go to 3 times the state average, I think it's going to have a negative effect on growth in Newberry. I think they're going to look for other communities that haven't done the same thing that Newberry's done, haven't faced that administrative order that says you're in a BMAP and you've got to do all these things yet. And they're 5 years behind us, but their impact fees will be enough to be a difference in a home sale. So without a successful funding partnership, the project is no longer affordable for Newberry and our existing ratepayers. So in conclusion, I appreciate you for the funding opportunities and programmings that you offer communities like Newberry. I appreciate your advocacy. I appreciate your commitment. I say I, but it's really the entirety of Newberry. We appreciate all that you do to protect our environment and our resources, and also offering these programs that help our ratepayers make projects more affordable. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mike. That's a mountain to face for sure. Hopefully things will come through and Tallahassee will smile upon you. Okay. Are there any questions? Oh, that was a pretty big project. Any questions from the board? All right. We have Steve Brown, City of Lake City. Good morning, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board. My name is Steve Brown. I am the Executive Director of Utilities for the City of Lake City. I am fairly new to my position, so I've inherited a lot of these projects, and we've been going back, and I would as well like to thank Mr. Marshall and his team for our help on moving these projects forward. The City of Lake City has a long history of working with Swanee River Water Management, and we really appreciate your help in funding these projects that we've had in the past. We have one in front of us that is in an extremely low income area. It as well is low lying, so every time we have a weather event, we have major septic issues, which cause major health concerns. We have recently done some preliminary engineering. I brought our engineering firm with us if you have any questions. What we would like to do is go to a central sewer system as well, get these septic tanks off. We're going to move some water mains to the front of the road areas, and also water meters to the front of the property. So making the whole area a lot safer and also bringing it up to standard for health concerns. So with that, if you have any questions, we can open it up. Or
Any questions from the board? We appreciate you coming today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Shane Wellendorf, Tall Timbers. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and Board. I'm Shane Wallendorf. I'm the Land Conservancy Director with Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy. We're an ecological research station that works in the Big Bend in North Florida and also a land trust that works throughout the Osceola River watershed. I appreciate the district's support for the Latson Tract Conservation Easement. It's an 1,834 acre conservation easement that surrounds Nuttall Rise Spring. When many people think of Nuttall Rise, they don't think of it as a spring, but it's actually classified as a first magnitude spring that puts out over 258 million gallons of water every day. As many of you know, the Osceola River goes underground multiple times on its journey, but it comes up for the last time at Nuttall Rise and then flows 5 miles to the Gulf. So this conservation easement surrounds the spring and includes over 2 miles of the Osceola River, over 1.8 miles of the Wassissa Slave Canal. And it's a spectacular piece of property with intact hydric hammock and floodplain forest. It's intact. In addition, there's some amazing sinkholes in there, and a few of those sinkholes are over 80 feet deep. So this property has a clear connection to Nuttall Rise and also to the underlying aquifer. You can see the property, you can see the conservation easement property from the Highway 98 bridge when you cross the Osceola. When you crest the bridge, look to the north, and where the Wassissa and the Osceola come together, that forest that you see is the Latson Tract. You can also see it from the designated paddling trail on the Slave Canal, and it's about just under 2 miles of that Slave Canal paddling trail goes through this property, and it really is quite spectacular and intact. So this project has a lot of great water resource protection and, of course, protects Nuttall Rise. I think the other thing that excites me about this project is that if it's funded and we can get it to completion, then this conservation easement will be held by Tall Timbers. So the long-term stewardship obligation that comes with that conservation easement and its administration would be held by Tall Timbers and the landowner. So the state of Florida gets great conservation benefits, indirect conservation benefits, and Tall Timbers and the landowner will maintain those resources. So thank you for your support. And I also want to say thank you to the district. They were excellent. The staff was excellent to work with.
We think they're pretty good too.
Agreed.
We're a little partial. Any questions? Tall Timbers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Let's see here. Troy, do you want to put this into our meeting minutes?
Chair, members of the board, this is a public comment request that we had received from Joanna Riley Brown from the Alachua Conservation Trust. She had requested that we present this to you this morning. The Alachua Conservation Trust, ACT, is grateful for the governing board's support of 3 significant conservation easement projects. These projects will protect nearly 1,000 acres of high recharge areas within the Suwannee and Santa Fe River basins, alleviating future significant impacts on the springs, drinking water quality, and sensitive habitat. ACT appreciates the governing board and district staff's partnership as we continue working toward the permanent protection of land in North Florida to strengthen the preservation and restoration of our cherished springs and aquifer.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments today? All right, Leroy. We'll close public comment and go on to a vote.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, would you like to read the recommendation one more time for us?
Sure. Authorize the executive director to submit all Springs funding project applications to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Is there a motion?
Made that motion, Madam Chair.
And we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you, Leroy.
Last item is item 21, which you approved on consent. I appreciate that. Mr. Schwab, that is the funding for the Taylor County groundwater study that we discussed a couple of meetings ago. So we do appreciate DEP for providing that funding. And the last update I would like to give to you, only a couple people in here know, but it is wonderful news. We heard from FEMA this week, and they are preparing to fund all of the detailed studies for the cities in the Santa Fe. If you remember, we had a lot of conversation about that. We will be going through the process to apply for all of that funding and hopefully have all of that set before you before September. But that is $750,000 for that study to complete that and get all of those Santa Fe maps out, the revised maps out. So again, that has happened this week. So wanted to give you guys an update.
We always like good news. That's wonderful.
It is good.
Thank you, sir. All right. That concludes our environmental projects and our resource management. At this time, we'll take a break and we'll be back here in 10 minutes. And that gives everybody a chance to have a few minutes. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. We certainly appreciate your time. Be safe going home. All right, we're going to resume our agenda. And our next item is we're going to back right back up to number 9. Tom, do you have anything for us today?
I am proud to say I do not, unless y'all have any questions.
All right, any questions for Tom? All right, we're going to just move right on to Mr. Tim.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good morning again.
Good morning.
For business and community services, we had 12 items on the agenda, items number 10 through 21. Items 11, 12, 13, 16, and 21 were approved by way of consent agenda, so I appreciate that so much. Item 17 was an informational item. So we'll start this morning with the items for your consideration will be item 10, found on BCS page 1, and this will be presented by the Chief of Administration, Mr. Ben Glass. And then we'll move to items number 14 and 15, which will be presented by our Chief Finance Officer, Ms. Pam Shaw. And those are found on BCS page 20 and 21. And Leroy has already covered the remaining items for our department. Mr. Ben?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board.
Good morning.
I have one item for your consideration this morning, item number 10. Staff recommends to declare the attached list of property items as surplus and authorize staff to dispose of these property items in the most cost-effective means as authorized by Chapter 274.05 Florida statutes. So this has been an ongoing effort, and I really have to give kudos to Kelly Landis and Kristen Thompson for their work in cleaning up our capital asset list, our inventory, and getting that in good shape. This should be the last tranche. I know you've seen several surpluses recently, so this should be the last one for these, with the exception of some vehicles that'll be coming to you next month. Happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Dan, I just got one question. On those items, there's several of them down there that say scrap, missing asset tag. Does that mean that it's just gone? It's no longer here?
The asset tag is missing off the item. We try to verify through serial number or other means. It's different for each item. A lot of those are deployed in the field. Many of them are component parts of monitoring stations. So as they break down, those parts are removed and disposed of. So that's the majority of them. There's a few that will be donated to the Boys Ranch across the street. For most of these, the law changed, and that's one reason we're going through cleaning up the list. We do not track in the same way items under 5,000. So the only items added to this inventory currently are 5,000 in value or greater. So a lot of these smaller items you wouldn't even see on this list moving forward. Still tracked, but just not as capital asset.
Okay. The items are truly just no longer usable. They're damaged or whatever. It's not that they're just gone. They're just damaged or broke.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Do you feel like never mind.
Any other questions for Ben?
Make a motion to go with a recommendation.
I second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried.
I do have one announcement, Madam Chair, if you'll indulge me. Wanted to let y'all know that for our field services building, the old lab building, the demolition of the interior of that building is underway, got underway this week. So folks will be on site. Hopefully we will be in that building and have it usable by August. It's an ambitious goal, but that's what we're working towards.
Deal. All right. Keep us updated.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. Thank you for adjusting the agenda. I have item number 14, BCS 20, that we pulled off of consent. It's for the fiscal year 2022-2023 financial audit report. As you'll recall, in April, Brad Huff from Powell & Jones came and presented the budget to the audit committee, and they did vote to accept the audit, but on Thursday last week, May 9th, it was discovered that there was a $31,000 expense, and I realize that's minimal, and it really is immaterial, but we found it to be miscoded from one program to another between even our separate program items. And after, it didn't have an impact to our fund balance at all, or any increase in fund balance or decrease in fund balance, but it did have some changes, minor changes to our assets, our liabilities, our revenue and expenditures in different program areas. And we just decided that before we had submitted this to the state for certification or the federal government and all the places that we have to submit it, and also to you to actually do the approval, Brad and I discussed it and decided to go ahead and make these minor modifications, but he did want me to point out that in the auditor's view, based on the immaterial nature of the transaction, in comparison to the volume of activity in the state special revenue fund, as well as the financial statements, this situation does not give rise to either a material weakness in internal controls or significant deficiencies in the internal controls. So we have made that change, and it is presented to you on the link on the board on the website. So I am asking that you approve the audit committee recommendation to accept the fiscal year 22-23 financial audit report from Powell & Jones CPA.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. Thank you.
My second item is item 15, BCS page 21. It is resolution 2024-03, fiscal year 2023-24 budget amendment, number 2024-01. That is our current fiscal year. We're doing a budget amendment. So in December of 2023, after we had approved the fiscal year budget, DEP announced project selection for the Water Quality Improvement Grant Program. And they awarded the district an additional $5 million towards the Sustainable Saloni Nutrient Mitigation Project, which is the Dairy Farm Pollutant Pilot Program, and it's under the Dairy Wastewater Program. And so that was not included in our budget for this current fiscal year. So there is a need now to, when there is a budget, so when the final budget for 24 was adopted, the district was totally unaware of these anticipated awards. So pursuant to the requirements of Section 373, 536, paren 4C of the Florida statute, if a district receives unanticipated funds after the adoption of the final budget, the budget may be amended after review and approval of the Executive Office of the Governor. We did submit this to the Executive Office of the Governor, and it was approved on April 18th of this year. And so you do have a copy of that approval letter in the packet. So this amendment will increase the state revenue and spending authority for contractual services by $5 million in the state revenue, special revenue fund under the 2.4 program, the other cooperative project activity under acquisition, restoration, and public works program. So my recommendation is to approve the resolution 2024-03 to adopt the fiscal year 2023-24 budget amendment number 2024-01.
Madam Chair, I made that motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried.
Thank you.
I have one question. On the 5 million, which we're glad to accept, is that earmarked specifically then for the dairy improvements? In other words, that will be earmarked for the dairies?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just checking.
Specific dairy.
For the dairy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, obviously our staff have been busy. They're doing a great job. I just want to appreciate the job that they do. That concludes our items.
Thank you, sir. All right. Good morning.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. The Division of Outreach and Operation had 6 items for your information and/or approval, which you did on recommended consent. Item number 24, which is the updated conservation easement for ingress and egress with Warehouser. Just wanted to provide an update. There was some language in there that updated the easement agreement to allow them to construct the road, but us to go ahead within 12 months, but us to go ahead and process that easement based on some development they're doing out at that site near the mega industrial site in Columbia County. Warehouser last week saw a window of opportunity to construct the road and jumped on that and did go ahead and construct the road. We will process the easement language as amended to allow that road to harden and any modifications that may be made. But I just wanted to provide an update that they did post the posting of these documents, go ahead and construct the road pursuant to the easement terms. So with that, I'll take any questions, and that concludes our items for OPS.
Any questions? All right. Thank you very much, Kaylin. Good morning, Ms. Brown.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Water Resources has 3 items. I'll just give you a brief update. And then item 30, which is the updated memorandum of agreement between us, the St. Johns River Water Management District, and DEP was approved by way of consent. Thank you for doing that. We do continue to collaborate with our partners. We are continuing to work on regional projects. And there is a lot of good conversation going on between the 2 districts. In addition, for the Western Water Supply Plan, which you approved earlier this year, we have sent out all of the notification letters for stakeholders that had projects in the plan and for stakeholders who needed to be notified of that plan approval. We'll continue to work with them and develop projects for the Western Planning Region as well. With that, I will hand it over for item 29 to Dr. Sean King, who's just going to give you an update on some of the MFL technical work on the Suwannee River. Unfortunately, we were not able to do the tour today. This recent week has not been conducive to tours, and especially tours of low water conditions. But I'll hand it over to Sean to just give you an update on some of the technical work that we've been doing based on the peer review.
Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have an update for you this morning. It's just an informational item, but want to let you know kind of where we're at with the upper and middle Suwannee MFLs. All right. So it's been a little bit since we've talked about this set of MFLs, so I wanted to recap a little bit here before getting into kind of what we've been working on. So for the upper Suwannee, that's the stretch of river from the Florida-Georgia line down to Ellaville, about where the Withlacoochee comes in, and has 2 compliance gauges, White Springs and Suwannee Springs, along the river there. Also has 9 priority springs in that stretch. And then the Middle Suwannee basically starts at Ellaville and goes down to Fanning Springs and has 2 long-term gauges, one at Ellaville, one at Branford, and then 24 priority springs, including 4 outstanding artists. So last year, we completed the updates to the draft MFL reports for both the upper and middle Suwannee segments. We then had a 3-person panel of experts review that work. And at the same time, we had released those reports for public comment. And basically through that process, we received quite a few comments, particularly from the peer reviewers. And so since then, we've been basically working to address those comments. I will say the peer review was pretty supportive overall, but they did note a few things that we've been looking into. One of which was a request to include more details on these reference timeframe adjustments that we made. So we've updated the appendices to include some more specific information for these river segments to that set of appendices. Probably the biggest thing we've been working on would be updates to the Gulf Sturgeon passage analyses, which is what I'm going to focus on today. And I'll also touch on some work we're doing with the Upper Suwannee area. And then kind of through this, we've also been working on actual response documents to the peer review and public comments that we've received. And we have drafts of those, but we can't quite finish those until we finalize the other updates. So that's more or less where we're at. A recap on some of the things we looked at as part of these MFLs. Pretty extensive list here, looking at paddling and boating as part of recreation, several different fish and wildlife habitat metrics, and including fish passage. And some of those focused on Gulf sturgeon, which are one of the iconic species here in the Suwannee River. Also looked at in-stream habitat for other fish and invertebrate species, looked at floodplain habitats, and then also looked at sediment loading with respect to kind of the morphology of the river, as well as water quality with respect to Gulf sturgeon spawning needs. After we did all of that, we had the results, and this is just showing the results from the Branford gauge, but the other 3 gauges are pretty similar. Here's all those different metrics we looked at, and we used this percent of time method for most of these, where we basically looked at, once we identified this threshold or critical flow, what would the flow be then if it changed by this 15% of time? So it's a little complicated, but that's what gets us to these hydrologic shift numbers, that basically how much the flow could change until we consider that metric to be significantly harmed. And then what we typically do is pick the lowest of those as being the limiting factor. And in all 4 cases for each of the gauges, it was this Gulf sturgeon spawning passage in the fall months that was really limited more than the other metrics were. All right. So we've kind of, I guess, had determined sturgeon passage seemed to be kind of our limiting factor. And then we had some peer review comments kind of suggesting that we look into this a little bit more. And so just wanted to reiterate that the sturgeon use this river as critical habitat. They are a threatened species by federal designation, and that's where this critical habitat comes into play. Basically, the river from the Gulf up to about Big Shoals there, and including parts of the Withlacoochee, are all considered critical habitat for Gulf sturgeon. And they do mostly live down in the Gulf of Mexico in the estuarine areas there. And that's where they feed and spend most of their time. But to reproduce, they need to come upstream. And there's particular areas they're looking for with the right gravelly substrate type to do that spawning and the laying of eggs. And so that's where this passage need comes into play. And I guess I should say, too, historically, there were quite a few sturgeon in this river and other rivers in the Gulf. But in the early 1900s, they were heavily overfished. And that really depleted the populations because they're fairly long-lived fish and don't reproduce all that fast. And then there's been some dams constructed on other rivers too that kind of prevent them from getting to these spawning areas as much. That's why, you know, with the lack of dams on the Suwannee, they have been able to recover some, but we're still seeing some issues there. And so as far as our passage analyses go, what we had done for the draft reports that were peer reviewed was assume that a sturgeon would need 3 foot of depth over 15-foot width for each of the shoals they would cross over. And that was kind of the best information we had at the time. It's about twice the depth of a sturgeon and twice the length to give them a little bit of buffer there. And this is the piece I think one of our peer reviewers really hit on is he basically said those seem like reasonable numbers, but is there any way to kind of verify that or look into that a little bit more? So that's what we've been doing here. In particular, you know, we've re-engaged with the biologists at the U.S. Geological Survey, which study Gulf sturgeon on the Suwannee and are kind of considered to be the experts for the sturgeon in this river. And they've been able to share with us some new data that they've been collecting, what's called their acoustic telemetry data. And so I want to explain a little bit about what that is. But for a while now, they've been basically collecting data on these sturgeon. And to do that, largely they have to go catch them first. So they'll put these nets out across the river and actually pull the sturgeon on board and weigh them and take measurements. This is one of the larger female sturgeon here. That one's about 130 pounds. You can see they do get pretty large, and the females tend to be larger than the males. And then they'll put these pit tags in them too, which are kind of similar to like a microchip you would get with your cat or dog, where basically if they were to recatch them, they can scan them and then see if that's one of the fish they've caught before and then collect the data accordingly. So that's one kind of tag that's been used for a while. But starting in about 2010, there was another type of tag that they started using, which is called an acoustic transmitter. These ones have to actually be surgically inserted into the fish, so it's a little more intensive. But what that allows then is they can put these receivers up and down the river, and every time one of those tagged fish passes, it basically records that data point. And so they can now tell much more about how the sturgeon are moving up and down the river. All right. So I want to share a little more about that because this is the data set we've been working with. These orange circles are where receivers have been deployed along the upper and middle Suwannee River segments here. And then they've also done some work. This is the USGS biologist that they've actually put out these egg collection pads and been able to confirm whether sturgeon were spawning in some of these areas because they could basically go see that their eggs were present there. And those tend to be in those gravelly areas that I mentioned. But potentially the USGS folks are thinking this area from about the Fort McComb boat ramp all the way up to Suwannee Springs, you know, could be potentially good spawning habitat if that substrate's present. So what I'll show you now, we have data from 3 of these receivers, basically one near Ellaville, one near Nobles Ferry where the Alapaha River comes in, and then one kind of near Suwannee Springs there, just a little downstream. And there's kind of a lot on here, so I'll walk you through this. But one thing they can do with this data set is tell basically whether the fish are moving upstream or whether they're moving downstream. So that's what these 2 graphs are showing, that with the top being the upstream moving fish. They'll basically be passing multiple receivers if they're moving upstream, so they can make that movement determination. And this is representing data from about 2011 to 2019. There were 59 sturgeon tagged that are being represented here, although not all of those were tagged during that whole time period. And basically each of these is a detection at one of those receivers. And so there's several things you can see here. One is there's this kind of bigger spike in the spring season for movement upstream and then subsequently going back downstream. There's also movement in the fall season going up and downstream. So you kind of see these two different seasonal spawning events. And then you can also see that starting downstream here at Ellaville, you tend to get more detections for any given calendar date and less as you go upstream to Nobles Ferry, which is in the orange, and even less if you can see some of these gray bars here. That's up at the Sewanee Springs gauge where the fish just seem to not go to quite as often. So, we can now tell basically when sturgeon are moving across certain areas, and we can use that information to look at these shoals that they need to pass over and kind of use that as a way to get a better sense of what those flows really are that the sturgeon need to pass the shoals. The other thing that kind of came up as we were discussing this further with the USGS folks is that they've got some recent genetic testing data that basically is showing that these are actually not the same fish spawning in the spring and the fall, that they see genetically distinct populations, that there's kind of a group that does it in the spring and a group that does it in the fall, and those aren't the same fish. And in fact, the ones in the fall don't seem to be doing quite as well as the ones in the spring. And that could be related to the flow conditions, which tend to be less in the fall, and kind of what we were seeing with the fall being the more limiting time period there. So while the sturgeon overall are doing pretty well in the Sewanee, the folks who are studying them are concerned about this fall group in particular, and they're seeing too that there's less juveniles that seem to be coming out of that fall group. And this is something that has been observed in other rivers. Like there seems to be an Apalachicola spring and fall group as well. In other sturgeon species, this has been noted, and in some cases, a seasonal group can be lost as well. So that's kind of where they're concerned right now. So we have been focusing a bit on that fall group. So just wanted to mention, we have several shoals along the Sewanee here. This is just showing the stretch from where the Santa Fe River comes in up to about Ellaville. And you can kind of tell from here which shoals might be the most limiting. They tend to be the higher ones in that part of the river where it would be the shallowest. So you've got Riverside Shoal here, this one near Lafayette Blue, and then this area near Power Plant Shoal, which we were hoping to take you guys on a tour of today, but you really wouldn't be able to see too much at this point. So I just want to kind of walk through each of these shoals and show you kind of how we've been able to use this acoustic telemetry data to refine these critical flow numbers. And the way this works is we've got receivers that kind of bracket each shoal. They're not necessarily right next to it, but you can still tell at basically what flow a sturgeon was able to pass over that shoal, because they would have been able to move from one receiver to the next one. And we've been focusing really on the female sturgeon because they're the larger ones, and moving upstream, which would be the harder direction to move. And so just to step through each of these, this is that Riverside Shoal, which is the one closest to the Branford gauge. And as far as the critical flows go, if we use that 3-foot depth by 15-foot width, we came up with a number of 3,044 cubic feet per second that the sturgeon would need to pass that shoal. And then using this acoustic telemetry data, we were able to actually see a female sturgeon able to move at a flow as low as 3,197 cubic feet per second, which actually, I think, matched up pretty well compared to the amount of variability you get in flows on the river here. So that was good to see. Lafayette Blue Shoal, this is one that's associated with the Ellaville gauge. Pretty similar results there. 1,998 versus 2,044. So pretty close match there, which kind of validates that our assumptions weren't too bad previously. We did also look at this power plant shoal, very close match there, but also these flows are a bit lower than what would be needed for that Lafayette Blue shoal. So we kind of just reconfirmed that that wasn't actually one of the limiting shoals in that particular stretch. And then Noble's Ferry is the highest shoal upstream that we had looked at. And this one would be the shoal really focused on for both the Sewanee and White Springs gauges. And here we did see a little more of a discrepancy. This might be related to just the lower flows once you get to this section, and that by the time the sturgeon have gotten up that high in the river, they may be a little more cautious about moving further upstream there and would actually wait for higher flows than just that 3-foot depth would provide. So we're not exactly sure why these numbers are not matching up quite as well, but that's something we're still looking into a bit. All right, so we've been able to kind of check and update our critical flows, but once we started digging into this more, we also saw we had enough data to actually look at this a little bit differently than we had previously. So with those critical flows, what we had done was look at just a 15% change in the time that flow would be exceeded. But there's another way of doing this, which is not to just look at that amount of time, but to look at whether a certain event had occurred, basically a successful passage event for sturgeon in this case. And this is an approach to developing MFLs that the St. Johns River Water Management District has used a lot in the past. We've used it on a few lakes also. But typically focuses on these wetland areas that are adjacent to a lake or a river and maintaining these flood events, or in some cases drying events. And that's considered to be a little more ecologically relevant than maybe just using a % of time change. But you need more information in order to do this type of metric. And that's basically what we have now. We've been able to determine the magnitude, duration, and frequency of these events and look at basically when significant harm would occur using this approach. And so, for example, going back to this detection data, you can see now, like more specifically, what time periods the sturgeon were able to pass some of these shoals. And so beforehand, we had just used February through May. But from talking with the USGS biologist, we've refined that to be more specifically from March 1st to May 1st. And then same in the fall where we had gone through November, where you can see now not as many fish are using this part of the river. We've refined that time period to be August 15th to October 15th. And then we've also been able to use this detection information to get a sense of how long it takes a fish once it passes the shoal to move upstream and be able to move back downstream. So that would be kind of the event duration that flow would need to be exceeded. And so here's kind of a summary of that information. So to do this event analysis, the event for each of these gauges would be the critical flow for the shoal. That's the most limiting in that reach. Then we have this refined time period that the event would need to occur in both the fall and the spring. And then for the duration, there's a 30-day duration for gauges in the middle Sewanee and 15 days for the upper Sewanee. Once they've gotten up that high, they don't need quite as much time to go up and spawn and then come back down. And then the frequency piece, that's always, I think, a little bit harder part to figure out. But what we've been able to do is kind of look at our data sets where we take pumping out of the flow record and see kind of what naturally would the frequency have been over time. And then basically base a frequency off of that as to what would be allowable, before significant harm would occur. And we've talked to the USGS biologist about this, and I think everybody's agreed this is a reasonable number, this 2 out of 3 years to be using, although some further research could help refine that number as well. So to get to the results here of this new analysis, Let me kind of explain what you're looking at here. So this is an example from the Ellaville gauge for the fall season. And this would be using our no pumping flow data set. This is more what would have happened, we project, under natural conditions, essentially. For our 82-year period of record for this gauge that we use for the MFL analyses, you can see basically many years where the critical flow was exceeded for that 30-day event duration that we had specified. But there are several years where that wouldn't have occurred. Basically, about 80% of the time, they would have been able to have that event where they would be able to have the sufficient passage. Then you can add to that now what the MFL would allow, which is to go from that 80% of the years to 67%, or 2 out of 3. And this is kind of what that would have looked like, back in time. We would have had years, I think there's 10 more that you're seeing here, where there would have been passage for 30 days, but then no longer would no longer occur under this MFL. So, again, this seems to be a reasonable number to work with for now. So that's what we're proposing at this point. Just to see that in table format here and to see the 4 gauges all together. This is showing the fall season results. Basically, we've got our new critical flow numbers from that acoustic telemetry data. We've got our durations associated with that for what this event would need to be. And we've got that frequency we think would have occurred without any pumping, and then what would be allowed under the MFL. And then there's, a bit of a change allowed there before we would say that significant harm would be occurring, because they'd no longer be able to have that passage event for 2 out of 3 years on average. So that's it. We're still working on the spring season piece a little bit, but it doesn't look like the spring season flows are going to be nearly as limiting. I think it's still the fall season that we're going to be focused on there. And then I just wanted to briefly mention what we're looking into now on the Upper Suwannee. This was going to be another one of our tour stops up at Suwannee Springs, where that old relic spring house is there. We also have that longer term gauge I mentioned is relocated right around this area. And this is showing really, 2 different conditions of the river here. One at very low flows, which would have been this January 2012 time period when really we saw the Suwannee and a lot of rivers in this area hit some of their record lows. In this case, the river was at about 40 cubic feet per second on this day when the image was taken. And you can see, there are starting to see some drier spots here where much more of the river bottom's exposed. But we've never seen this gauge actually go dry or have it start to be disconnected in any way from the main river channel there. But the image on the right showing, a few years later when the river is over 100 times higher flow, it's about 5,400 CFS in this image. I think it's about 18 feet higher. So you can get quite a bit of variation on the Suwannee, which we're seeing some of, I think, today. If you went out there today, it wouldn't be quite as high as this image, but you still probably wouldn't be able to see that much out there. But it's really this low flow condition we're focused on right now. We kind of realized as we were going through some of these additional analyses that, we could get into a situation where there starts to be little to no flow in the river if pumping exceeded a certain amount. So that's what we're just trying to refine and make sure we don't start to have a situation where the river is not fully connected and starting to maybe have some stagnant pool areas and things like that. So that's pretty much where we're at right now. Just to wrap up here, really the next step is to complete these MFL reports and the comment response documents. The main things we need to do we're almost done, I think, with the sturgeon analysis piece. So then we will need to figure out if we're going to do anything else on the Upper Suwannee, as I just mentioned in the previous slide. Then we would update all the documents accordingly. I mean, we're well into that process. And then we would share them with our partners at DEP and the St. John's District for review, as we have been throughout this process. Remember, DEP's ultimately going to be the ones to set these MFLs because of the potential cross-boundary pumping impacts here. And so once all that's settled and finalized, we would post those documents to our website and make them available for the public. We would want to meet with some of the stakeholders, especially ones who've submitted comments and been engaged on this process, and let them know about these changes that we've made. And then after everybody's aware of that is when we would then do the status assessment and basically see, has pumping caused, an exceedance of these MFL values, and or are we fine and everything's being met for now. And then just lastly, the work on these MFLs is never, I think, supposed to be fully done. We would want to do some additional research here where we could further refine some of these flow requirements for the sturgeon. There's been several research tasks proposed to do that, but it would take several years to collect that information. And ideally, we'd have some dry years in there to really confirm whether, we're seeing those passage restrictions and what effects that have on the sturgeon population. So that was a lot of information, but be happy to take any questions.
Questions?
I got just one. The sturgeon survey or the research that you've done, has it changed the MFL in your mind any?
Yeah, I mean, we do see the numbers probably changing a little bit, but not, I wouldn't say that significantly. I mean, sometimes even some smaller changes in these numbers can be the difference between it meeting the MFL or not. So that's why we want to make sure, we are using the best information we have. And we do think this event-based approach is an improvement over the way we had done it previously.
When you said they were over harvested, what were they eating the fish or what were they doing?
Madam Chair. Yeah, so there's quite a bit of documentation back in the early 1900s where, they were pulling thousands of sturgeon out of rivers all along the Gulf of Mexico. And I think that meat was being shipped, up north. I mean, there was a big demand for it while it lasted. And I don't think people quite realized how quickly that population could be depleted. My understanding is there was some egg harvesting at the time, too, that was also kind of a problem with the long-term population dynamics.
Interesting. So now in the fall, are you sure like somebody from Lafayette County is not sitting there trying to fish those fish, and catching those ones that are going past those, there's a lot of rednecks down through that area. I mean, maybe even some people from Dixie County might be running up that way and fishing that area too. Are we making sure that they're not catching those fish?
I mean, I haven't heard any reports of that myself.
Okay.
But, yeah, we can
Just,
look at
just wanted to verify that. Maybe Mr. Alexander could help us out on that, right? He probably could do some recon on that for us. He knows some people.
I hear some people from Taylor County coming.
No. We're more in the mudfish on the Osceola.
You mentioned Apalachicola River. What other rivers are sustaining the population?
Yeah, so there's some on the Choctawhatchee River, I think the Pearl River, and what else? There's one or two others as you go west that still have some. They think there used to be a lot on the Mobile River that they don't really see them anymore, probably because of the dams that have been constructed. Even as far west as the Rio Grande, they think there used to be some that they don't really see anymore.
Interesting.
Yes. I'm so impressed with the information that they have gathered with the sturgeon that we can use for the MFLs, and pretty much it just verified some of the numbers that you had already modeled. going back to your, that last slide where it showed the dry river and the flooded river. I don't know how you model weather conditions because obviously the dry river, and then the flooded river there were more straws in the ground with the flooded river. So I don't know how in the world you model weather conditions because we're sucking more out over here and the river's fuller and this one's all dried up. So y'all do an amazing job just using the sturgeon to verify that your numbers you're looking at are really, really close. But how you do the weather conditions and come up with some appropriate numbers, I don't know.
I mean, I think a lot of that's looking at a long time period, which we're lucky to have these long-term gauges on these stretches of the Suwannee here. And the idea is if we look over a long enough time period, we'll capture, the highs and lows in our analyses. But yeah, it is, I think during the dry times where we would expect to see more of the issues with pumping on the river. So that's where we're focusing right now.
Yeah.
Sean, speaking long-term, we're renewing this, if I understand this, North Florida Regional Water Supply Partnership. So in this last 10 years, what have we learned?
Well, Madam Chair, I haven't been around too long in that time period. I might defer to Amy Brown, who also probably wasn't here during that whole time period. But.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, I think some of the things that we have learned at the beginning of that time frame when we formed the partnership, we did not have a regional model that both districts recognized and used for permitting purposes. We now have a shared regional model, and it does give us a picture of what the influences of pumping are across the full planning region. I think we have a better sense from some of the work that St. John's has done on their side and the work that we've done here. I think we've refined the minimum flows tools, the way that we look at the systems and how we ask the questions for what things become limiting. In the absence of, you're supposed to use the best data you have. And so things like pulling this USGS data set in and kind of corroborating the way that things were done is really important for these kind of critical decisions. So we've certainly learned from St. John's, like the event-based methods that they've used and tried to supplement the ways that things have been done here to corroborate our findings and make sure that we're making the best decision we can with the data we have. I think also we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated in how we analyze the data. Some of the statistical analysis, it's really difficult to tease out, as we know from this last month, the influence that rainfall has in this area is dramatic. And so really to understand the influences of pumping, you have to tease apart the weather signals that are highly variable from the groundwater pumping signals and try to look at both of them. And so I think we've gotten some refined methods on that as well.
Dr. Brown, during that same time frame, we were doing this regional study of withdrawal. That Ischnatutney went into recovery during that time, correct?
Ischnatutney was assessed as being in recovery during that time. So the data and tools to draw those conclusions, and then the data and tools to refine those conclusions using a shared regional model happened during the time of the partnership. But the impacts from pumping predated the last 10 years. The impacts had happened, and the partnership that was formed was a result of the impacts that were being observed. And the system going into recovery was the process of bringing all the data to bear to verify it and set a rule associated with the status of the river. So there were observations and concerns raised, but then there was the formal process to actually set the MFL. There was the rulemaking that happened, and then with the development of the shared model, a revisiting of the technical work, and then we have the proposed reestablished rule that's in the process of being worked on with the regional projects that would come with it to recover the system. So the problem predated the partnership, but the partnership is what's kind of moving us towards a permanent solution that brings the system out of recovery.
Okay, so with the data, we've been able to establish an MFL
Yes, sir.
that would keep something out of recovery. But where is it bringing us with the recovery coming out of recovery? The stuff that's already damaged. Where does this, we can say the MFL is X, but how do we increase the MFL if it's under that to bring back up? Obviously pump less, but through this regional planning over, what was it, originally in 13 or something?
Initiated?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So we've 10, 11 years. Do we have a direction? Do we have, we've established a number. Okay, we need this, but we're not there. Have we established any way to turn that? By natural causes, I assume it's not keeping up with growth and pumping.
So the solutions that we talked about, so you've already hit on one, you can pump less out of the ground. There is a population growth factor that makes that a challenging overall solution, but certainly conservation is one of the things that's been heavily invested in. And that's where you can see public supply per capita rates and other measures, all the ag efficiencies that have come online. So there is an effort to actually use less water per person or per farm acre. But then separate from that, that's when you talk about the bigger aquifer recharge infrastructure projects. Some of those are being talked about with the larger utilities on the East Coast, potentially trying to do a large aquifer recharge project, moving reclaimed water or treating reclaimed water to potable standards. And then you also have the projects that Mr. Marshall is working on in the projects team here to try and harvest and recharge stormwater rather than letting it go to tide. Those are all large, complicated projects, but there's active work going on across both fronts in terms of big infrastructure from the East Coast, more local projects here to capture stormwater, also pushing very hard on efficiencies across the board.
Well, if we know the MFL at the good point, then I would assume anything under that is declining. So at what point on the MFL do we make a move to alter withdrawal? I mean, if alternative water sources are not keeping up with the natural growth and pumping, then the only, I mean, any peer review, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that the glass is not going to fill back up if you don't quit drinking it. I guess my question is what point of decline do we have to get in before we actually make a move to stop some of the withdrawal? I mean, is the aquifer in such a state that these numbers are not as critical as they seem to me? I mean,
I'm happy to hand it over to the regulatory folks to speak to this a little bit more, but I will say there is a regulatory strategy that has changed the way water can be permitted in this area. So the North Florida region, the ability to permit right now because of the recovery strategy, you have to permit in compliance with the recovery strategy. So it would be misleading to say there's not already an influence on pumping in this area. But what happens in terms of the permanent recovery strategy is going to be dictated by the revisions that are being worked on right now. We anticipate workshops this summer on the lower Santa Fe. And that recovery strategy, rather than the interim one that was put in place with the first version, is going to have, it could have more influence on the ability to pump water in this area.
What he's talking about. I think there's a single answer for the solution on it, that she's already spoken to on the regulatory strategy relative to what we're working on right now with the lower Santa Fe and Kentucky recovery. With that, and I know you and I've had some conversations about permittees coming in and applying or gaining their permits, that type of thing. needing to do offsets as part of the regulatory program with this, once it's formally adopted. That will be one way to address the withdrawal aspect. That would end up being projects that the applicants would have to do to put water back into the system, a certain threshold of withdrawal. That's only one aspect. And he also mentioned working with the utilities over on the East Coast, and we're working with the utilities in our district as well. But there's a greater potential because legislation passed last year, I believe it was, not this most recent session, but it eliminates surface water discharges for wastewater, so that they can no longer discharge their water to a river or a surface water body with that. So with that, we're looking at working with the utilities that have the capacity to utilize that discharge water, reuse water, either in a reuse fashion or to do a water supply project with it to get warm water back into the ground. In an effort to get to a point where we don't have to, certainly the board can do whatever they want, but in an effort to provide a water supply for our permittees, so that we don't have to get to a point of a moratorium on issuing water. That's where we're trying to get to. I mean, that's part of our core mission, is to be able to provide a water supply for today and for growth with that, and that's kind of what we're working on.
Absolutely. So how do we address the small communities when they ask? The East Coast seems to issue, St. John's issues larger permits than we do on a regular basis. Do they replenish the aquifer in an equivalent manner to their withdrawal? Is it on a fair basis with the small community versus the large community? These are the questions that I hear.
Well, and what I would tell you is actually the memorandum of agreement that was approved today on consent agenda facilitates that communication with our sister agency over at St. John and the Department of Environmental Protection to that extent on permit coordination. It also addresses, that agreement also addresses MFL development and strategies associated with it. But from a permitting aspect, regulatory aspect, it does require that communication between the districts and the Department of Environmental Protection associated with those permits that you're referring to. With it. We didn't have some of the specific, and granted, this is a renewal of this agreement. It's been amended and an extent to look at what our needs are today versus what they were when the agreement was initiated. I mean, that's grown considerably. Our understanding of MFLs have grown a lot. We still have a lot more to learn with those, but also the geology and how withdrawals affect the across North Florida. So to get to that point, yes, this agreement allows us to address the permit and the consideration of what permittees in St. John's are doing and the impacts that are having in Suwannee and vice versa if there were any of those. That's why Amy and I and other staff have been engaging with the utility groups to the east and then also locally.
Also locally, to that extent, so that we can have valid projects. Some of the projects that you saw today were relative to our alternative water supply and also our springs protection are starting down that road to get to that point. I don't know if that answers your questions. It's not in a, we didn't get this in this situation in a short time frame, and it's going to take some time to get back out of it.
I get that. And I read the new MOA, like the old one has similar rhetoric in it. I'm just wondering, what did we conclude out of the first one? All right, so we've got some bases now, and we're just gonna, this one, we're gonna continue to monitor, and what's our hypothesis? What do we hope to gain out of the next 10 years, out of this partnership?
Madam Chair, in the short term, one of the first things to get out of the partnership would be the updated recovery strategy for the lower Santa Fe. But even under today's requirements, permittees in both districts would be held to the same standards based on the current recovery strategy. But the updated recovery strategy would come with a 20-year time frame to recovery for the Ichetucknee and the Santa Fe. So that gives us a 20-year time clock to achieve recovery, and that phases out the projects that would be needed to achieve the recovery within that time frame. In addition, we'll be continuing to refine our modeling and our tools because we know, again, based on the variability that was referenced, we're going to need more sophisticated tools to keep up as questions come up in the future about when and how much water you can take out of the ground. So we're going to be continuing to update tools and things like that. But in the meantime, it would be to get the updated recovery strategy, to finalize the minimum flows for the Swanee. And if any strategies needed there, we would coordinate with the same group to get those strategies implemented.
And we don't necessarily need updated tools for the MFL.
For today's MFLs, we are required to use the best data we have to set the MFLs. But through time, the expectation is that we continue to improve our tools to keep pace with what understanding is about the science of the area, what variabilities we're seeing. But no, we have tools today. We would hope to have improved tools in 10 years that make more refined decisions because we'll have a longer time frame, we'll have more sophisticated analyses that could be done.
Yeah, I get the picture of the time frame. I understand that. I just, I guess it would help if we saw some example of the MFL. I mean, I hear MFL all the time. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that number is. I don't know what number I'm at. I'd like some correlation to that to understand the urgency of the situation we're in. Is it bad? Is it very bad? Is it critical? And where are we at, and are we decreasing as we're evaluating? Surely these numbers show something, the data that we're getting.
Are you talking about for the Santa Fe?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's because, or the lower Santa Fe. That I'm concerned with the recovery situations that we have. Are they continuing to drop in the MFL? Holding their own. Where are we at? We have the numbers established, but certainly we can tell that, can't we?
Yes, I mean, we have the status for the Santa Fe and the Ichetucknee, and we have the recovery targets that we're working towards with projects.
Yeah. I'd like to see something that shows me over the last 5 years, what has this done? Maybe help me understand. But I talk to a lot of small communities, and they ask me questions that I really can't answer.
Yes, sir.
And we're spending millions and millions of dollars, and we now know what makes the sturgeon happy. Like, I want to know what the water situation is. Now, if that relates to minimum flows and stuff, wonderful. But that's a subcategory of what we're trying to do. That should be just something that comes along with the MFL. Okay, we learned this.
And what I would offer, Mr. Charles, we would be glad to get with you and walk through the MFL and the status, as Amy has mentioned, in more detail with that. And if the board feels that we need to do a workshop along those lines, we'd be glad to do that as well.
Well, I think we've had workshops on the MFL before.
They're very well, and I will tell you, they are very complicated, as you all know, and challenging to understand. Sean has to work with me on some of the science behind some of this one-on-one sometimes.
I'm sure. I understand what Mr. Charles is saying, and I feel the same way. We all we want to all grade ourselves or see where we're at in relationship to where we want to be. And to his point, we spend a lot of money in an effort to mitigate the drawdown of water in the aquifer and the flows in the river. It would, I think, make us feel better if you had some, something to gauge it by, something that says over the past 10 years, we've spent, $500 million for these type projects, and it's created a 0.5% or something that gives us an idea that we're spending this money for a good reason. And I question myself all the time when we approve a lot of these projects. It makes good sense. The science is there that says, you're going to put less nutrient in the ground and you're going to save this much gallons of water. But over a period of time, are we actually improving? Or to Charlie's case, are we going backwards? Do we need to get more aggressive than what we are?
Madam Chair, I think the biggest problem that we're having now is the impact on the state on population growth. But the population growth is going to the coastal counties, so I think we need to put more pressure on the utility companies to look at alternative water sources. And I've been saying this a long time, and the coastal counties need to start looking at desalination for their water needs and quit pulling it from our aquifer.
Absolutely.
Because we can analyze ourselves to death and see this continue to lower based on the population and the impact on the water supply. And if we're not trying to find it from some other place, like desalination, everybody says it's too expensive, but at what point is it too expensive? When we get to the point where the sturgeon can't go between two shoals, all of a sudden we go, you guys better start doing something on the coast. Because 86% of the population of Florida is on the coast. They've got the money to do it. And that's where I think we need to put the pressure. That's my soapbox.
Madam Chair, what I would suggest or say to that, Mr. Sessions, is that there are a host of projects in working with the utility group to the east that Amy and I have been working with. They've identified a number of projects over there and looking at the feasibility of them and the costs associated with them. And those will come back, those projects will come back to the board at some point when we get to a finalization. It's still early in their assessment process, but desalination has been identified as one of those projects. So that's being costed out and determining the feasibility of that through this assessment that the utility groups are paying for. And St. John's is paying for their consultant to do the work on this. So, yeah, we hope to bring something back to the board.
Because a few months ago, I went to a really poor island in the Caribbean, and they've got enough to do desalination because that's their only way to get water.
Right.
They don't have any other water source. So if a poor island can make it happen, I believe some of our coastal counties can. Not saying Taylor can, but
We're good on water over there right now.
you get your own water every
We got
day.
plenty. We get it
Yeah,
from
you
the
got
ground.
plenty. Yeah.
Well, and that's another option is, we're getting plenty of rain right now. The rivers are up. Is there a way that some of that water could be harvested and stored for a period of time and then meted back out into the system whenever we don't get the rains that we are? That's another option that's being discussed.
And I think what you would like to see is the little gauge over here when you have everybody's donating money and the little barometer starts rising. You want to know whether it's rising or is it dropping. And I understand that, when we talk to our constituents, they want to know the same thing. Where are some of our results? But as far as our tools, I see our tools getting better and better, and it's either, helping us adjust our MFLs, or it's like the sturgeon study certainly shows that you're pretty daggum close to being in the right numbers. And I know that our permitting, at this point in time has changed because the permittee can't exceed a certain number or they're going to have to do an offset. So we shouldn't be going backwards. Now, how, we can look at that and absolutely tell, but with our permitting, our permittees are not allowed to make us go backwards. They're having to either do offsets or pump less water. They just don't get as much. So I know and that's, I think, where we were trying to head with our MFLs is to say, okay, what are the limits and where do we need to then in our permitting say yes or no, or if you want this amount, then you're going to have to do X or Y. Now, as far as a gauge to do that, I don't, I assume that's when we go and look at our wells that we have and we watch our groundwater levels and to make sure that we're looking at, and I don't hear again, weather. I don't know how you do weather.
Madam Chair,
That's your wild card.
it is not as easy to tease apart the pumping impacts from the other impacts that the state of Florida sees with the natural variations in weather that we see. I think what would be helpful for me and for us to maybe present information in a useful way is if I get with any of the board members who are kind of facing these questions or have questions on the MFLs or how we convey our information, if I can get with them and kind of understand what the questions are, then maybe we can pull together a presentation that clarifies some of those that would be relevant for the board.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think the biggest question I get is, we're spending the money, like Mr. Sessions says, on the MFLs, and population's growing, as we've mentioned, and if we drop below whatever our minimum flow is, what are we gonna do about it? I mean, people have to have drinking water. We gotta have water, people gotta eat, we gotta water our crops. At what level is there some critical action going to be taken? And I don't understand, I'm like you, Mr. Keith, I can't explain MFLs to anybody when they ask me about it. And I can tell them, we're not gonna stop drinking water, we're gonna drink water. Now, what I will say, what I do like, and we're spending a lot of money, and when you look at the sturgeon thing, it shows we're looking at a very holistic approach. I think when we look back through, our time, society in this country, we focused and not looked at a holistic approach on things. I think that's very necessary. But we all see it. I mean, you go up to White Springs and you can walk across it. 3 weeks later, it's just about touching the bridge, depending on how much rainflow we get. So we're in a unique state that our water comes and goes. And so you can't over panic and look and say, because we all know we're one hurricane away from being flooded out and everything's being recharged. But it does get frustrating when you're sitting here and we're spending money and we can't explain what we're spending money on, and there's no correlation as to we get all this data, which is great, and I'm all for the data collection. And anymore, I'm curious. I want to know what's going on with our snook study too, right? I mean, because it's all part of the ecosystem, it's all part of the water supply, and it's what we're doing. But in the end, what are we going to do? We're not going to turn the faucet off. I mean, if we drop below whatever critical level we set, and I'll go ahead and say right now, you're going to say we're going to start turning off the irrigations on our farmland. That's food. I hear people say, well, we're feeding people outside of our district. So let's go ahead and put this on. If you want to take that protectionist approach just for what we're doing in this district, then what do you have that you're wearing, and what clothing and your phone are you going to walk out of this office that doesn't come from outside of this district? So no, it's our obligation to feed people outside of this district. So it gets frustrating. I agree. But there's nothing, the thing is, when people ask you, when it gets really low, what are we going to do? Nothing. We're going to keep pumping water until there's, at what point? I think that's really an answer that people ask me that I just cannot answer. I don't have an answer for them when they ask that question.
Mr.
Does that
Smith,
make sense?
we're mixing a couple different scenarios there.
Right.
When we're thinking about the minimum flows, and again, I'm happy to get questions and kind of, because there's a short-term answer and there's a longer-term answer,
And I can't answer.
but keep in mind that when we're talking about setting minimum flows, we're not talking about something where if it dries up in November and the flow drops below a threshold for a couple days. Again, if you think back to what he presented, we recognize that there are going to be some years that those sturgeon cannot make the passage that they need to make. But think of the MFLs as a long-term view. If we keep using water the way we're using it, is it going to cause a problem to the natural systems or not? There's also the shorter term, like if we're saying, yes, it's dried up and the next 3 weeks it looks like things are below a threshold, that's when you're talking about more of a water shortage situation. But the goal is that if we see over the long term that our water supplies are not sufficient to sustain our natural systems and meet our future demand, that it is the district's obligation then to identify what the options are to meet that need. And that's where we talk about, can we pull the water off, store it, and recharge it when it's there, so that when it's not there, there's extra capacity in the aquifer? Or do we need to think about investing in something at the coast where you actually do desal on our coast and bring that inland? So those are the types of, but when we think of MFLs and MFL violations, think of those as a long-term or chronic. There's also a water shortage situation where, you know, we ask people to change what they're doing, but to your point, you have agriculture and other pressures that limit how much you can do. So our goal is to make sure that we're identifying long-term whether we have sufficient supplies or not, and if we don't, that we're trying to develop those supplies.
One other question, Dr. Brown. Since we see in our hydrological reports aquifer 75 and 90%, see this pretty regularly, at least normal or above normal. How long does that take to see improvement in the environment? In other words, it doesn't seem like you talk about withdrawal water, but yet our aquifer is healthy, but our ecosystem connected to the aquifer, springs and stuff, are not. So how does that correlate? I mean, you get in floods areas, so there's lots of water, but yet there's no change to the springs. How is that?
The spring flow is changing based on rainfall. So the flows are higher because it has been raining, except where the river comes up too high and then it makes the springs flow the other way. But so the springs do respond to the flows. And again, when you think about the questions that Sean's being asked to answer, the question is, over the long term, with all of the variability we see in rainfall, where some years it's above average and some years it's below average, are we taking an amount of water that is sustainable through time? And that's the question that you have to tease apart. And so, yes, during times of above average rainfall, you will see flows come up. But when that rain turns off, if you're pumping at a high level, then that flow will drop to an unsustainable level. And so that's the question that the minimum flows group is being asked to answer is, over the long term, can we sustain the amount of pumping that we're permitting and the amount of pumping that has to happen because things like domestic self-supply are going to come into the state? We can't restrict domestic self-supply from pulling water for their household needs. So as that occurs, are we going to be able to sustain the flows through the full variability that we see? So not just these wet times, but also the dry times and the average times.
Let me ask you this, in your opinion.
Oh dear.
Do you think the changing in the spring is more by overuse or vegetation and stuff than it is lack of water?
That would depend on which changes we're talking about. And I think that we saw during those dry times that we had, 2010, 2011, and I think prior to that in the 2000s, you saw some very low conditions, and those low conditions were exacerbated by pumping. but there are other stressors that are impacting the springs too. That's why we have the basin management action plans. That's why there are certain areas that are restricted for recreation. So there are certainly multiple factors that are stressing the springs.
And so we could take a period of drought that we had, and it could do a substantial amount of damage that would take 50 or 100 years to recover from in natural atmospheric time. Is that what you're saying? I mean, we could damage something that would take a long period of water flow to restore.
We could change the way the systems flow and the way the
The reason
systems
I asked it,
behave.
I've seen
Yes.
time-lapse pictures of Devil's Ear and places like that, how it changed in 5 years. I can't fathom that. I don't understand, how the look or the appearance of a spring can change that drastically. Is it from a bad drought period, or is it the fact that we have more public use of the springs?
I think the challenge is that those aren't either or propositions, right? You might have a bad drought and have intense use and have high nutrients, and those three would all be extra stressors.
Nutrient levels.
So it's not an either or in terms of the health of the springs. All of those factors would influence the health of the springs.
Madam Chair, if I could add as well. Ms. Charles, I think you touched on something certainly that we've discussed here. If you're looking at it, if you look at the aesthetics of the spring, certainly public use has an impact to that. I think the park system would agree with that. They set a limitation on the Ichetucknee River years ago.
We saw that with Rum Island.
Yes, sir. And so that certainly is one factor that can affect, and that foot traffic can affect your vegetation, which then is another criteria that you look at with there. If you're looking at the flow of that spring, that's more oriented towards what the MFL is set to address. And like Amy has said, MFLs are developed for long-term protection with there. From a regulatory sense, the permits that we issue do have criteria in them that if we enter into a drought period where conditions are long or conditions are drier, and rainfall is lacking, there is what's called a water shortage declaration. In my lifetime here at this district, they did it in 2012. I think it was May 28th. It was a special meeting for this board that they made that declaration because we were in a severe drought period. Okay. Was that exceeding, would that exceed an MFL at the time? Yeah. The water levels and flows in the rivers would have been below that MFL that's current right now. But again, you can have dry periods in the MFL evaluation because you look at the entire record. So with that, there are regulatory constraints. And I was with the Department of Ag at that time. We were going out and meeting with producers relative to their irrigation methods, but there were also communities and irrigation requirements or non-irrigation requirements. One, for the type of irrigation systems that were out there, if they were less than a certain percentage efficiency, then they could not be operated except at night. That was one of the criteria. Another one was that I recall, and I wish Warren was here on some of this now, but were aesthetic water fountains. Those were shut down. And I remember the one over at North Florida Regional, them shutting it off because of, it's just solely aesthetic purposes on it. So there are factors, regulatory factors that can come in during a drought period to help alleviate a longer time frame within an MFL on there of impact to that. And, I can't tell you there wouldn't be any impact. I think if the drought had extended for some period of time, yes, there were some type of environmental impacts to it. But then we moved immediately into a flooding situation, as y'all will recall, with that comes in. That shows the flashiness of our system. And I'm thankful for that, that we had that type of quick recovery. But again, the MFL, the development of the MFLs is for a longer duration period so that you don't stay in a drier period longer because of how much pumping is occurring during that time. So it's a tricky balance.
I quit.
I would offer that today we're meeting our MFL.
Yes?
For the condition of the river, MFL, from a flow perspective.
What?
That's today. December, June,
Oh, you-
July, we may not be. We may not be achieving that flow depending upon how much rainfall.
Go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Here for you.
No, that was helpful, and the information on your slides was very, very helpful. Very interesting. You don't have a picture of a baby sturgeon, do you? I was just wondering what they look like.
Yeah, let me see what I can find.
Okay.
They look about like that right there. And they float.
And they float?
Yeah, well, they get on that gravel and then
they
they,
on the
and then they,
gravel.
and then they start, they get a little tail on them like that right there, and they start swimming.
Okay.
It's just, they go from the egg and it has to be fertilized,
Okay.
And
Well, let's
then
hope
they-
the
then
little
they-
boy
then they-
fish can get
then-
up
that's right,
there.
I hope the little boy fish can get there. Because without little boy fish, little girl fish dropping eggs, they ain't doing no good. And then they come on down. It's simple biology.
I got you.
I learned
I'm
it
with
in the
you
ninth
now.
grade.
You know way too much about that, Sturgeon.
Sean, thank you very much. All righty. All right, Mr. Thomas.
Careful what you say.
I would offer, Mr. Richard, that they actually do cultivate the aquaculture industry for cultivating sturgeon. And years ago, whenever Ann Shortell was here, Warren and I actually took her out to an aquaculture facility. I'd be glad to take the board if y'all would like to. We don't have one in our district, but there are some in Northwest and also over in St. John's. There's one just to the east of Fort McCoy, and that's the one that we visited. And I would tell you, I don't personally care for the caviar. That's just a personal preference of mine. But the smoked sturgeon was very good, and they sell it. I mean, commercially, it's available to sell, and you can order it. It's quite pricey. Because it is a delicacy, but it's a very good eating fish, I would say, to that extent. But
That's off the
I
record.
have
though. We don't
not
want those
caught
guys.
any out of the
Yeah,
river.
yeah, we don't want
Don't
those
tell,
guys.
don't
the
tell
Gulf
the
sturgeon.
Taylor County group.
Lafayette and Dixie County guys coming over there and eating those fish in the
These are
fall.
just the ones that jump in the boat when you're riding.
Yeah,
There you
exactly.
And to my knowledge, and I'm not a sturgeon expert, but with what information I've gotten from FWC on it is that they're kind of like a catfish. They're pretty much a bottom dweller until they go to breaching and they come up, and I've observed that numerous times on the river. Before I go much further on this, I've asked Tyler Winburn to come and give a brief legislative update as to what bills have been passed, the governor has signed off on, and what's still outstanding. So, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to
All right.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members.
Morning.
Name's Tyler Winburn. I'm the Legislative and Government Affairs Coordinator. Last month, I gave you guys a presentation on the 2024 regular legislative session. I'll give you a couple updates today of things that have changed. As of this morning, the governor signed 184 of the 325 bills that were passed by the legislature. Last month, I presented 7 of those bills that were of particular interest to the district. 4 of those bills have been signed and are set to make law or be law July 1st. The first of those is Senate Bill 1136, which is the regulation of water resources. And that's the well water contractor bill that changed some of the requirements set for a well water licensing test, and create some advertising restrictions on well water contractors. The next bill that's set to be law July 1st has already been signed is Senate Bill 1532, which is the mitigation bill, which expands some of the options for mitigation banks and some private-public partnerships with mitigation banks. The third bill is House Bill 7013, which is special districts, which creates some reporting requirements for all special districts in the state, which would include the Water Management District. We already do all the things that are required of that bill, and we're just going to have to report it now to FDAX. So our consolidated annual, our CRA plan is already covers all of the requirements. The fourth bill that's already been signed is House Bill 1557, and that's DEP's package bill. As far as the water managements are concerned, there'll be a lot of changes, but the only thing that it makes us do that we didn't have to do previously is it's going to make some rulemaking requirements for reclaimed water that are going to be have to be completed by the end of next year. We're still waiting on three bills that I reported on last meeting. That's House Bill 149, which is continuing contracts, which increases the limit of continuing contracts that we execute from $4 million to $7.5 million. We're also waiting on House Bill 1049, which is the flood disclosure of real property. Whenever you sell a real property, if it's a residential property, there's some disclosures that have to be made now, or will be if this gets signed. If there's ever been any claims, insurance requirements, things along those lines. And we're also waiting on Senate Bill 7040, which is the ratification of DEP's rules on stormwater, and it's going to create the new stormwater rules. Additionally, the budget hasn't been sent to the governor yet, so we're still waiting on that, and it will be at some point. So that's all I've got, and if you got any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Any questions for Tallahassee? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much.
I believe the board is aware that the tour that we had planned for today has been, we will be rescheduling that for a number of reasons, one of which is the condition current river itself, and then some of the structural that are at the park, one of the parks that we were going to go see are under, they're getting reworked, I would say, due to flood with it, and then also certainly the potential threat from weather today. With it, I did want to make the board aware that we had a meeting with Columbia County, the county manager, and also Commissioner Ron Williams from there, who's their chair. And that was relative to the interlocal agreement that we have with Columbia County about the property. And they are going to, they committed that they were going to do a workshop for their board in June relative to that property and the potential of that property for some type of park or some type of water supply project. With that, we'll have representation at that workshop meeting as well. So hopefully we'll be able to bring an update to the board following that. I believe that meeting will be occurring after our board meeting in June, so it'll probably be July before we give an update on it. We do have a workshop item today for our tentative budget. And we actually have a new presenter for that, Miss Kristen Thompson, who is our finance program manager. She's been with the district since 2018, but she'll be giving that presentation today. And so look forward to hearing that and seeing it. And then the last thing that I would mention is that the district and Leroy and Mary Diaz are going to be nominated for national recognition. And this is with the Association of State Floodplain Managers. And Leroy gave you the good news earlier about some of the FEMA funding and what we're doing, what we'll be able to do with that effort. And this recognition is an outreach effort going forward for exceptional outreach efforts and recognition of that relative to the work that has been done with FEMA and their floodplain mapping effort. So we look forward to
Amen
that.
on that one. That's,
They have done a superb
Yes.
job with that, and it shows. And with that, Madam Chair, I will let it go, unless y'all have questions.
Hugh, just got a quick question, on the, Springs funding program. I noticed that, Tall Timbers came to us and kind of used us as a vehicle to get one of their, conservation easements done.
Yes, sir.
And, I kind of got a little bit of heartburn about that. I mean, they didn't go to the lands committee about that, and I know it's their project. But they used our vehicle to get there. And if you'll look at that project over there where they're wanting that conservation easement, there's no development ability for that land. That's all the western sloughs over there. It's all flood land. It's river flood land. All we're doing is helping landowners that have purchased land or families that own that land over the years to quote unquote preserve it, but they're from development or whatever else they want to try to claim that they're wanting to do with that land, but you're not going to do anything but timber harvest on that land if you timber harvest over there in the market conditions that we're in. So I think we need to be, if they're going to use our vehicle to go to DEP to get Springs funding, I think it would be a courtesy to come to us before a board meeting in that process with GUM. I've got a little bit of heartburn about that personally. I think it could have been handled a little bit better, in my opinion. But seems like that's been some in the past what Tall Timbers likes to do.
We will take that into.
And I appreciate that.
consideration on this.
Yes, sir. I mean, they're going after $1.9 million of state taxpayer money to provide a conservation easement to a piece of land that's totally surrounded by state property or federal property that's not going to be developed or to be developed today. And there's no way to develop that land.
Will do.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, on all those properties, the benefit were low too. Look at the
Do what now?
water quality, water quantity,
Yeah,
benefits. So
it's already there. I mean, there's nobody going to disrupt or destroy that over there.
it had no benefit to what it said.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I saw that too.
so our priorities need to be a little different. I mean, with $1.9 million.
With taxpayer money, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we've had other folks come the right way and ask us for conservation easements or springs protection in the past, and or prevention of development, and we've evaluated it and we've come up to the conclusion that the value wasn't there. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. There have been applications submitted. And if the board so chooses, we can withdraw that project.
Well, I think that there's probably better springs protection opportunities for other communities that may need it, and that would be more value, more bang for your buck spent the money if that's what we're going to do.
Benefit perspective.
Than what that particular, in my opinion, what that particular project is. But then again, they didn't come to the lands committee, they didn't ask us, but yet they're gonna use us to get their funding.
They apply for the funding on it.
Yep. Don't you, am I half cocked here? I mean,
No, sure.
steer me if I'm not perceiving the situation correctly. And I'll be more than happy to reconsider if that's the case.
That's right. I mean, other than, that should be the process. We should bring those to the lands committee, any of the conservation easements like that, for consideration. And, you know, it's still not out of the picture, and it's not guaranteed that will be funded, but I agree with you that the process should be changed on it.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, any other questions for you today? All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. It's up to the board if they want to do the workshop. I think we're looking at 20 minutes on budget. Not that long even,
Do the work.
from a presentation standpoint, so.
All right,
We'll do it. Let's
let's do it. I agree.
Do
Let's-
we need to adjourn first?
Motion to
oh,
adjourn.
do we need to, do we need to take a little break or just adjourn?
I don't.
Okay, all right. Is there a motion to
I'll make
adjourn
that-
the
make the
board
motion.
meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Motion carried. All right, you want to take a 5-minute break, and then at noon, we'll take and do our workshop. You've got the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. As Mr. Thomas mentioned, this is my first opportunity to present to you all, so I will begin by taking a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kristen Thompson. I'm the finance program manager here. I've been with the district for 6 years. And again, that's Kristen, not to be confused with Christina. Since she has left us to go to the sister agency, Pam and I have shared in the responsibility of overseeing the development of the budget. And I would like to take a moment to point out that it is very much a collaborative effort that relies heavily on input from office chiefs and senior management. So we do appreciate the district-wide effort that went into this. And today it is my pleasure to present to you the fiscal year 2024-2025 tentative budget. Here's my pointer. Okay. Which came to $79,967,278. You may note that this is an increase of approximately $10.5 million from the preliminary budget of $69.4 million. We do have a slide that we will be doing an overview of some of those major differences. But first, I would like to kick it off with an overview of the fiscal year 2025 budget timeline. We have the workshop today. Next up will be the presentation of the tentative budget for your approval at the July board on July 9th of 2024. We will then submit the tentative budget to the legislature on August 1st, 2024. We will hold our first public hearing for budget and truth and millage on September the 10th, followed by the final hearing on September the 23rd. And the adopted budget year will commence on October 1st, 2024 for the 2024 to 25 fiscal year. And briefly, we will overview some of the revenue assumptions that we made for the development of the tentative budget. We have state appropriations of just over $9 million. This includes just over $2.2 million in operations, $1.7 million for land management, $450,000 for environmental resource permitting, $350,000 for payment in lieu of taxes, and $1.6 million for minimum flows and levels. This amount also includes, wrong button, $2.5 million legislative budget request for the district headquarters renovation, which note is a $2 million reduction of the $4.5 million we had slated in the preliminary budget. We also are assuming ad valorem tax revenue of just over $6.8 million. This figure is actually from the fiscal year 24 adopted budget, which will be adjusted once we receive the property appraiser values before the July board. We also have federal funding of just over $10.4 million. In addition to the 9 million in state appropriations, we do have an additional 40.3 million in state funding for special projects, as well as 11.5 million that is slated for fund balance utilization. Some of the fund balance highlights, we have 1.235 million in river cost share, 520,000 in agricultural cost share, 2.39 million for land and conservation easement acquisitions, as well as 1.2 million for regional projects. And this is the slide we've been waiting for. This slide highlights the major differences resulting in the 10.5 million increase from preliminary to the tentative budget. We have 5 million that is coming from additional anticipated funding sources for alternative water supply project. This includes 3 million in land acquisition, as well as 2 million in recovery and recharge. There is also anticipated additional funding from water quality improvement grants. The 2.8 million that you see here is for the Sustainable Swanee, and that is our anticipated expenditure for fiscal year 25 of the $5 million amendment that you approved at the board earlier today for those additional funds. There's also 2.6 million for Live Oak Septic to Sewer, and an additional 1 million in Resilient Florida grants funding. We also, as we mentioned earlier, had a reduction of 2 million in the funding for the district headquarters renovations. All right, and for our expenditure comparison, the 10.5 million increase was primarily in contractual services. We received 5.2 million in increases that you see there in the red. There was also in the orange and interagency expenditures an increase of 3.7 million, as well as a $1.3 million increase to fixed capital outlay that you see here in the light blue. For programmatic comparison, you will see in the orange color that we had $12.2 million in increasing to the acquisition, restoration, and public works program area. That was as a result of the additional funding that we received for special projects. And in the operation of maintenance and lands that you see here in the gray area, we actually had a reduction of 1.8 million, and that was a result of the $2 million reduction for the headquarter renovation. I will point out that the outreach, which is this percentage that you see here in this little sliver, there was a percentage reduction from 0.3% to 0.26%. This was as a result of the overall increase in the budget. However, the dollar amount actually increased 1,000 from 210,000 to 211,000. And we also wanted to point out that in addition, there are 123,500 of outreach that is budgeted across other program areas for a total of 334,000 budgeted for outreach efforts.
That's for you, Mr.
They prepared me. They thought you might be interested in that. And with that, I will take any questions.
Any questions from the board?
No question.
On the reduction of the district headquarters renovation, the original number, was that just kind of a plug number that we had put in there? We do, or is there some sort of estimate that we've worked on as far as costs for renovations? Or is it just a number that we thought, okay, we'll put that number in there?
Yes, ma'am. The reduction of 4.5 million to 2.5 million is based on the progress of the governor's budget. It was in the recommended budget at 4.5 million at the time that we presented the preliminary, and that has since been updated.
Okay.
Chair, if I can, but the original request that we put in, it was an estimate that was quantifiable. It wasn't just a number that we came to.
What is the plan going forward with the reduced budget? Is it gonna be, we're gonna do a part of the project or?
Yes, sir, we'll do part of the project, because it would have been phased in different portions anyway, and then we'll go back and ask again for the remaining balance as we need it.
Any other questions?
The sustainable 2.8 million,
Yes, sir.
is that actually intended for outreach?
I don't think we quite got
Just curious. That would make a pie.
It's for the dairy wastewater project that we feel like will get done in FY25.
We'll reach out to them.
Okay. Yeah.
We can paint it on the side of the
We,
cow.
that's right.
Oh, goodness. That was very, very helpful and informative, and we appreciate very much. And it's very nice to meet you today.
Thank you. You as
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, no further questions?
Go ahead.
All right, so that was our only item on our workshop, so we will go ahead and do we have a motion to adjourn our workshop?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed like that. Motion carried. Thank you.